If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. I'm starting to notice a trend here. Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing you a card discussion on Fleeting Infinity, the brand new card that's going to be released in Flames of Destruction, which is going to be the set following Extreme Force, meaning we won't be getting this card here in the TCG for quite some time. But this is a card that's following in a line of new hand traps that are going to be implemented into the game, and so I felt that it definitely warranted some discussion. But before we get into that, I want to give a big shout out to my newest patrons, as always, and since the new year, there's been a lot of them. So, big shout outs to Samuel, to Ryan, to Andy, to Fat2Fit, as well as Jesh, and also big shout outs to Kaylani for upping their pledge as well. And if you guys want to help support me and the channel through Patreon, then check out the link in the description below. But let's go ahead and get right into it. So, for those of you who don't know, Fleeting Infinity is a trap card that reads as follows. If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. Target one face-up monster your opponent controls. That monster's effects are negated until the end of that turn. If this set card is activated, also during that turn, the effects of other spell and trap cards in the same column as this card are negated. So that's a little bit to take in. So we're going to go ahead and break the effects down piece by piece, starting with the most notable aspect here is the fact that you can activate this card from your hand if you control no cards. And what is that very reminiscent of? Evenly matched. But obviously this is not evenly matched, not even by a mile. Evenly matched is a card that's going to completely wipe your opponent's board, and this card is just going to negate one petty monster effect. So already on the balance scale, these two cards aren't even close in comparison. I think the closest card you could probably compare Fleeting Infinity to is a card like Effect Veiler, which is a hand trap that we haven't seen pretty much in the meta in a very long time, although in the OCG is actually starting to see a little bit more play now that Spiral has been on the downturn, as well as Grinder Golem coming up in Resurgence, just because of the fact that Grinder Golem is completely abusable in the OCG by comparison. So, Effect Veiler versus Fleeting Infinity. What does it really boil down to? Well, both of these cards negate the effect of a monster that your opponent controls, essentially. But one of the big key differences is that Effect Veiler has to be done during your opponent's main phase, whereas this card doesn't have that stipulation. You can use it during your opponent's turn, you can even use it during your own turn. Now, there aren't a lot of instances where that's actually going to come up, because you have to think, you still can't control any cards if you want to activate this. So your opponent would have to be activating an effect while you control no cards, and that really isn't too likely to happen, mainly because your opponent, especially if they have cards that are reactive and are trying to disrupt you during your turn, they're going to wait until you play a card, because they're going to want to at least exchange their effect in exchange for card advantage, that they're going to be hitting your resources. Otherwise, there's really no benefit in them utilizing any of their disruptive cards if they're not going to be hitting any cards out of your hand. So this is a little bit awkward to use during your own turn, so that's not really going to come up too much. You also have to consider the fact that Effect Veiler is actually better because you can use Effect Veiler when you have an established board. The fact that this card can be used from the hand while you don't control any cards, albeit it's useful, at the same time, Effect Veiler is better in that instance because you can assemble a board and keep Effect Veiler in your hand, whereas with this card, you have to actually set it if you want it to work as effect negation. Now, to be fair, I guess if you're going first, whether you have Effect Veiler or Fleeting Infinity, you're going to be able to either set one or keep the other in your hand. But by setting the card, it makes it much more vulnerable to a wide means of disruption, and that's not exactly going to be as beneficial as having something like Effect Veiler, even though with Fleeting Infinity, you're not specifically restricted to the main phase of your opponent's turn. So there is a little bit of benefit there. But there's one other thing that you have to consider when it comes to Effect Veiler versus Fleeting Infinity, and that is the fact that Effect Veiler is a monster, and it's also also a tuner at that. And the reason why that's so important is because not only does that mean that you can use Effect Veiler for synchro plays, especially in tandem with Crystron Needle Fiber, which is going to just have a massive impact once it drops here in the TCG, but also the fact that you can use it as link material. At the very least, the fact that any monster in the game now basically just inherently acts as link material means that monsters are much more valuable than, say, something like spells or traps. And so by being able to have access to just even more tools to just pretty much dive into your extra deck and start summoning out link monsters is absolutely invaluable. So that's definitely something you have to keep in mind. Another card that you might want to compare Fleeting Infinity to is Psy-Frame Gear Gamma, because Psy-Frame Gear Gamma also negates effects and also has a very similar stipulation where you can't control any monsters to activate. Now, not controlling monsters and not controlling cards are two very different things, but they are very similar in that way, and that's why I feel it definitely warrants the comparison. So the big difference here is that even though with Psy-Frame Gear Gamma you can't control any monsters, when your opponent activates an effect, it doesn't just have to be an effect on the field. Fleeting Infinity is restricted in that way, and Psy-Frame Gear Gamma can hit any monster effect, period. Whether it's in the hand, whether it's in the graveyard, doesn't matter, Gamma is able to hit it. And not only is it able to negate the effect, Gamma is also able to destroy the monster, and you're also able to special out Psy-Frame Driver, which obviously is a downside because you have to run Driver if you're planning on running Gamma, which means it lessens your consistency and definitely increase your dead draw capabilities. But at the same time, there's so much more upside when it comes to a card like Gamma. You can be so much more proactive with Gamma in comparison to something like Fleeting Infinity, because you're able to stop your opponent from using their monster effects to pop your spells and traps, whereas with a card like Fleeting Infinity, you can't do that because of the stipulation that you can't control any cards, and that's actually a really big deal. Not to mention that Psy-Frame Gear Gamma can also hit hand traps, and that's one of the biggest reasons why Gamma is so popular at the current moment in the meta. So that's also another card that if we're going to talk about hand traps, that, you know, Gamma is just leagues ahead of Fleeting Infinity by comparison. But there is also the second effect of Fleeting Infinity that we definitely need to discuss as well. So basically, if it is activated while it's set on the field, you're able to negate all spell and trap activations that would occur in the same column as that card. So why would that be valuable? Well, for instance, if your opponent has a Floodgate face up on the field, you could set this card, and then not only are you able to negate the effect of an opposing monster, but then you're also able to negate that Floodgate at the same time, meaning you're able to play under that Floodgate for the turn, kind of like a pseudo DDD Siegfried in a way, and then you're able to proceed on with your plays. You're also able to negate the effects of Pendulum monsters that are in the Pendulum Zone, because they are considered spell cards when they're in the Pendulum Zone. So is that really relevant? Maybe not all the time, but there could be an instance where that might actually matter. But the big question is that worth playing this card? And I don't think so when you look at it in that right, because yeah, sure, it's pretty powerful that it's got some flexibility in what it's able to stop, but that isn't worth the fact that you have to take this card, set it for an entire turn, and then use it during your opponent's turn. That's assuming it doesn't get blown up by the wide variety of spell and trap removal that's in the game. There's just so much that can go wrong with this card, just as much as there is, you know, the use, and it definitely outweighs the usefulness that this card has. And you compare it to the other hand traps that are currently in the game. I mean, again, Evenly Matched is probably the best thing to compare this to, because they both have the stipulation that you can't control cards if you want to activate it from the hand. But look at the payout that you're getting from a card like Evenly Matched compared to something like Fleeting Infinity. For Evenly Matched, you're basically wiping your opponent's board except for one card. With Fleeting Infinity, you're negating one effect, and you're not even destroying the monster that you're negating. I think that might be my biggest issue with that card, is that you're still taking a minus to use it, and you're not even destroying the monster. And yeah, sure, Effect Veiler works in the same way, but it's just a matter of, at that point, you might as well just be playing Effect Veiler, because there's so much versatility in a card like Effect Veiler by comparison that it just makes it that it's not even worth running, especially now that we're seeing this new era of hand traps where the trap cards themselves can be activated from the hand. They need to be doing a lot more than just negating the effect of one monster. You can just play Breakthrough Skill at that point, and Breakthrough Skill can negate 2 effects because then you can banish it again from the grave and get some more value out of it. You have a card like Red Reboot, which is the last card I did on How Good Is, and this is another hand trap where, sure, it might be a little bit more niche in its application because you have to use it to negate a trap card, but it doesn't have any restriction on when it can be activated other than negating a trap card itself, and you just have to pay half your life points, meaning it's always going to be live. So Red Reboot is even better than a card like Fleeting Infinity in my opinion, because it actually seems much more applicable in the instances where you would want to use it, where Fleeting Infinity pretty much falls short in all of the categories where you might want to take advantage of it. One thing I will say is that if Fleeting Infinity did have the ability to be played and have the second portion of its effect be active at the same time, I think that would be really interesting, because then, for instance, let's say Fleeting Infinity had the ability that you could drop it either to negate the effect of a monster, or you could just drop it and negate the effects of all spell and traps in a column, and you got to pick which effect you were activating. That would be really cool, because then, for instance, if your opponent plays a card, let's say like Brilliant Fusion, you could just drop this card down, and it's going to negate the Brilliant Fusion because it's going to negate all spell and trap activations in that column for the turn. I think that would be really nifty in the fact that it would be much more flexible, because it would be able to stop a much wider array of effects than just being able to stop one monster effect if you control no cards. To have a card say if you control no cards you can activate this from the hand, that better be one absolute blowout of an effect, and that's why a card like Evenly Matched is worth as much as it is. But I really just don't see that in Fleeting Infinity. I think that even though we're seeing this new evolution of hand traps and pretty much how traps are having to evolve to keep up with the current meta, I think what's happening is that we need just these cards to be so powerful if they're going to keep up, and that traps are at a point now where they just need to be absolutely devastating to even be worth running. I mean, you have to look at what traps people are running, and the fact that they are so powerful that even if people are going to consider running them at all, they need to be doing something so devastating or be able to just shut down the opponent entirely to even be worth running, because with so many powerful monsters and spell effects that we can use immediately, why would we even need to bother with a card like this? So personally, I don't think it's going to be the best card, and I don't really think it's going to see much play, because if anyone's going to want to play this, you might as well just play something like Effect Veiler or Sideframe Gear Gamma. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about Fleeting Infinity. I really want to hear your thoughts and see what you guys think about this card. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you guys really found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time. 1, 2, 3, 4.